Hey folks, welcome to the Unsung Podcast. We're back after an extended break.
Wait a minute.
It was lovely.
This is 2022, A New Hope, Mark. You need to come in hotter than
I
that.
can't come in hotter than that.
Come on, we've got to be optimistic about this year. It's going to be plainer sailing.
I just want 2019 back. Can I not just have it back?
Does anyone remember 2019? How was that? What was that out
I don't know.
of 10?
The entire second half of the last decade was just one big shit show. I can't really remember.
I can't, at this point, I can't remember much about 2019.
Exactly, that's why I want it back, because I can't remember it.
This one's going to be good, right? We're in person.
That'd be good.
We're in person. That's a good sign.
That's a good sign,
Got a
Three of
beer.
us in one room.
He's got a beer.
Nice.
It's like the old days.
It's like the old days, it's like Christmas.
My next door neighbours aren't practicing tuba and trumpet, respectively.
Yeah, the old brass sandwich.
The old brass sandwich, as it will now be known. Yeah, It's all coming up roses.
So, gentlemen, how have you been? It's been a little while since we've seen and spoken to each other properly.
Yeah, no, none of us actually made fools of ourselves on the Christmas special, I don't think.
I actually think it went particularly well, but Vicky's been a wee bit hard on herself.
I mean, she was probably the most well-oiled, but I don't think she was misbehaved.
Nah, not at all.
Her rendition of cod liver oil in the orange juice
Yeah, it was beautiful.
is going to stay with me a long time. It's great. None of us are shaking off murderous hangovers from that. New Year and Christmas were very tepid affairs, but hey, it just gives you time to get on with other things.
It's true.
One of the things we've been getting on with is restructuring the podcast subs thing. You want to get that out of the road?
Fucking seamless. Seamless.
Yeah, no,
Love it. Gotta love it. Yeah, so as we've banged on about now for fucking 4 years, we have a Patreon, which right now you can go and subscribe, and we'll give you some. We would have given you some things, but we're not going to do that anymore. Not those things. We're going to give you new things if you sign up, because we're going to relaunch our entire structure on Patreon. There'll be more news on that very soon. Probably within the next couple of weeks, I would imagine.
But yeah, it'll be a lot better. We've been told by our audience that we're not particularly good at selling ourselves, and we're definitely not good at monetizing the audience that listens to this podcast, because
there's a lot of them.
Yeah, you're out there, but we're just not reaping the rewards. So we'll try and get a wee bit better at that by making the subscription a bit more exciting. Anything else we've been getting on with?
Yeah, so two shout outs. First of all, I want to shout out Thomas Smart. You sweet boy. You've sent us your demo.
Yes.
Jesus.
Oh, yes,
Yeah,
when we get to dismantle that.
We're going to do 3 at a time, weren't we?
Yeah.
So we need 2 more.
So if you've already missed Demolicious episode number 1, go and check it out.
Excuse me? Demolicious.
Had a few people saying to me that they really enjoyed it, so that might happen soon. And our new subscriber John Boyleo, thank you, and you sent us a very nice message as well. So he is a fan of all the chat of these Metal Hammer and Krang cover series.
Oh yeah, we are going to have to do that
That's been
mixtape at some
getting
point.
teased for a
Yeah.
while. That was actually Craig that started that chat, I believe.
Yeah.
Something he said.
So yeah, that's something that we will probably do a mixtape on quite soon. And yeah, thank you both of you. You're both gentlemen in completely different ways, and hopefully
Welcome to the fold.
Yes, hopefully we won't make either of you angry.
And the fold's about to change, so we'll see if you stay with it. Yep. And other than that, well, usually we don't announce what the first album of the year is going to be. We kind of drop it on you. This year we handed it over to our man Dave here, and he went big, went mighty big. Dave,
Fuck it.
drum roll, or like double kick roll.
Yeah, double kick. Brrrr. I've gone Slayer. I've gone fucking Slayer.
Gone big.
And I'm going for South of Heaven. I wanted to do a metal one, and so I guess over the next hour I'll let Chris chat you through the hot takes, the troublesome politics, the problematic behaviour, the takedown of most of their time as a band. I'll let Mark just grumble disapprovingly that he's bored of them, and I'm happy to listen to it. I always love to hear, learn and discuss. I guess we'll talk about thrash metal.
We'll talk about thrash metal. Yeah.
Its social context, its musical context. We'll talk about Slayer's place in history, their influence, their place amongst thrash metal's big four. What made them stand out. We'll talk about their ups and downs, their controversies, their albums. Whatever is said, though, and I'm sure it will be interesting and fun and informative and provocative. Whatever is said in the next hour, you truly cannot take away from the fact that Slayer fucking rules, man! Slayer fucking rules! So with that,
they're one of those bands, aren't they?
Yeah.
Right, cool. Well, basics. Let's just get this shit out the road.
Yep.
Slayer is a band generally. That's right.
Yeah, they're not
they
banned
are no
anymore.
longer.
Which is so weird because I always grew up and lived in a world with Slayer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know.
Anyway, Kerry King, Tom Araya, Jeff Hanneman and Dave Lombardo are the sort of definitive lineup of the band. A lot of you will know them also with a drummer called Paul Bostaff. And they also had contributions from a guy called John Detty, who was in them very briefly, and Gary Holt, who was the most recent guitarist.
Gary Holt, who sounds like he plays in midfield for Alloa Athletic.
I think it's Hearts had a player called Gary Holt.
That's right, left back maybe.
He played between 2013 and 2019 when the band split up. He used to be a member of Exodus, and he took over because Jeff Hanneman sadly died. We'll talk a wee bit about that later on. They have, as I understand it, 12 studio albums.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
There are also some. Was it Live Undead? Have they got? Is that
Their second release. Well, actually, there was an EP, but then there was like a live album, which was released just as they were sort of kicking off. Like their second record was just a live recording of their first record.
How many metal bands have Live Undead as a live record? There must be a whole bunch,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, definitely.
Do you know Live and Dead was only recording in front of 12 people?
Jesus,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah.
That's
Because it wasn't a live show. It wasn't a gig. It was a live-ish.
Album.
That's disappointing. I didn't know that because I would rather you'd stopped there and I could have imagined that.
It was still live, but it was not like an actual...
No, I would have liked it if it had been a gig
And nobody turned up.
And then it was just 2 people, because I'm pretty sure we've released stuff like that. They are, as you said, a member of the Big Four. Bay Area thrash scene, San Francisco. Actually, I don't know a lot about this, right? So I'm going to be the research guy tonight, okay? But sort of started with Exodus, the band Exodus in 1979, which, by the way, is a band that featured Kirk Hammett. And Exodus, I think they also played with Metallica in 82. That's kind of when Metallica came onto the scene. Metallica were originally from LA.
Yeah.
But they ended up relocating. Also, Cliff Burton joined them. I mean, this is going to be driving metal fans absolutely mental. Let me just shamble through it. They all moved in. Did they all move into an apartment together? Is that right? Like
All of the bands, like all 50 thrash metal bands.
Metallica. They have like a Metallica flat, like the fucking Monkeys. So
Yeah. Is that
brilliant.
not where Dave Mustaine kicked somebody's dog? Was that not the? Is that not why he got? We've done a Metallica episode slagging off Metallica.
And Doug got kicked.
Yeah.
Was it Kirk Hammett's dog?
No, it might have been James Hetfield's dog or James Hetfield's mum's dog, and Dave Mustaine kicked it, and that's why he got chucked out of the band.
Oh my goodness, that's brilliant.
Kerry King was in Metallica as well.
Was he?
Yeah, he was in Metallica at the very beginning.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Other acts that are associated with the Bay Area thrash scene that aren't part of the Big Four are Possessed, Testament. Death Angel. Do you have any others that I'm missing?
From like California or just all over?
Well, I guess the Bay Area thing is San Francisco specifically, isn't it? Right, but I mean that's the thing. Metallica weren't, or at least Jason and Lars, they were from LA, but
So were Slayer as well, from Huntington Park.
Really,
So it's just outside LA. Yeah.
how the fuck did this all happen in San Francisco then?
I don't know.
Because I mean, when Metallica did kick out Mustaine, he moved to LA and started Megadeth. So that's technically an LA band as well.
Yeah.
So was anyone from San Francisco? There's just a lot of cheap apartments going. Because
Aye, probably.
where were Anthrax from?
New York City.
Yeah, they were NYC. They were East Coast.
So who's the other? Who are the Big Four?
They are the Big Four.
They are the Big Four, but it's not necessarily Bay Area thrash. They were just the Big Four of thrash. The Big Four of thrash weren't necessarily all from the same place.
This is good because I'm getting a schooling. Well, I had a particularly novel take on the Big Four, right? Because 4 is a significant number in history, obviously, and if you think of other famous fours in history, famous quartets, and you can compare the Big Four to the 4 constituent parts of other famous quartets, and the one that most immediately comes to mind is the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
All right, okay. Yeah, of course.
And if we look at the sort of personas, the aesthetic.
Right, can I guess what you've gone for?
Yeah, please do. So obviously the Big Four are Metallica, Megadeth, Anthrax and Slayer.
Yeah.
Okay, so I feel it's pretty obvious who fits into what turtle.
Well, Anthrax or Michelangelo.
Yes.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, because they're goofy, they're fun.
The bits, skatery, surfy.
Like pizza, dude.
Yeah. I can't remember the difference between Raphael and... I think Raphael is Metallica. No?
No.
Maybe I haven't watched the
Raphael Slayer, because he's the serious one, right?
Exactly.
I'm getting
he was the
mixed up.
sinister one. Yep. Raphael, especially, I think if you read the comics and stuff, he was actually sometimes a pretty kind of heavy duty character.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I know that I'm saying you did, Mark, but
I didn't.
I
barely remember TV show.
I think it's pretty self-explanatory that Leonardo, the alpha male, is Metallica.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I was getting them two mixed up.
Hold my breath as I wish for death. Oh, please, God, wake me.
And that leaves Megadeth being the sort of quasi-intellectuals. They're the obvious Donatello.
Yeah.
Who sells, but who's buying?
So I think that lines up pretty nicely.
I'm into that. That makes sense.
That's how you can remember the Big Four. Think of the Turtles, think about the metal bands that match them, and problem solved.
Can we get a t-shirt made with this on it, please? If you would buy that t-shirt, please drop a comment.
That is literally the entire new concept of the subs thing. So there's something else we need to talk about, right? So thrash music. Dave, you give us a little bit of a schooling on thrash music, because there's some aspects of it I want to hone in on.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting sort of whole movement for me, and I actually found 4 different academic theses
Awesome.
on thrash metal and 80s culture and society and everything.
That's brilliant.
But yeah, it's interesting that it comes from California in the 80s, which is a very sort of privileged, suntanned white man, but it's still angry rage and sort of rebellion. It's anti-establishment, it's anti-government, it's anti-Christian, anti-church, and I kind of see it as a coming from punk music. You've got all these working class and middle class teenage kids listening to Iron Maiden and Black Sabbath and Judas Priest and Motorhead and Venom, which is funnily enough a whole load of working class 70s British bands. And you've got punk, and you've got, like, I guess Motorhead and Iron Maiden were punk as well. And then put that in the 80s, but you've got Reagan, you've got Tipper Gore, you've got the PMRC all happening. And I just feel that punk happened in the late 70s, and then it split, and you still had angry kids, angry teenagers, and some of them went on and articulated that rage politically, and it became hip-hop or, whatever. Hardcore. Some of them articulated musically, and it became post-punk maybe. And then some of them articulated it by being evil and drinking Stella, wearing tight jeans and singing about Satan, and that was thrash metal. And I think it was like that's kind of where I see thrash metal as an outlet for teenagers who felt that sort of 80s consumerism wasn't for them, Christian values weren't for them, sunshine and aerobics and yoga weren't for them.
It's interesting. We often touch on class in music and how it's changed over the years. Thrash metal, that kind of like, hey, fucking rock, man! It's got that super working class, almost dumbass sort of aspect to it, redneck aspect to it. And the metal bands that it spawned from and the punk bands that it spawned from, not obviously not all the punk bands. I don't think we're talking Clash punk here. I think we're talking punk, like really dirty punk. It is interesting because it does seem like an amalgam of two primarily working class genres, and it's also a part of metal that is very synonymous with like kind of redneck truck howling at the moon, smashing beer bottles out the window, and having those halcyon sort of movie flashback moments. You know, it's really conducive of those kind of images, and that's an interesting part of it. I think another interesting part of it is, as you mentioned, it's metal plus a punk ingredient, whereas we've spoken a bit about the New York scene at the time and the New York scene that followed, which seems more like punk with a metal ingredient. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So it's interesting that the two coasts have these two quite distinct movements, and they seem born of similar ingredients, but in different ratios.
Yeah,
maybe.
Yeah, on the East Coast you would have had try to think of bands way back then, Black Flag and all that, you know, who were taking the punk and doing metal things with it, but not necessarily.
Exactly, but then when you get to like Damage and My War and all that kind of stuff, like
Black Sabbath and
they start, it's punk bands adding metal in, and I think that's a really interesting part. It's also worth pointing out that there is a stinking Slayer album called Undisputed Attitude that really
record,
gives you a tour of their punk heritage. The bands that they were inspired by, where they just did covers of it. It's not very well thought of, but you know, if you want to sort of see where they were coming from,
it's better than Garage Inc., I'd say.
It's funny both bands did that, isn't it?
Aye, totally.
And one thing I think is also worth pointing out about thrash, and the only, I guess, Slayer are the only band out of the big four which never really went to that next commercial step and tried to actually become like a rock band.
That's true. Yeah,
they kept it really uncommercial.
They stayed pretty pure, apart from that one foray into nu metal production. But we'll go through it. And it's not even a nu metal record.
This is the thing. We're like, the way that's written off has been like, oh, it's basically a nu metal album. You're like, come on, Jesus Christ! Like that's it's just not. Yeah. You know, as you say, they're one of the only bands that stayed the course. And Kerry King's spoken a lot about that. He's like, this is just what we wanted to do. We didn't want to develop. We played a style of music. We had to keep playing that style of music. It's a style of music we like playing.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it. We weren't looking to grow as a band. It's like that's how we like sounding.
They just moved to drop B instead of playing E flat. You know what I mean? That's the only thing they did.
It's funny. I think I guess thrash metal, for some reason, recently I've been watching a lot of like 80s horror movies. I've been catching up.
Good for you.
It's a good, there's a lot of tie-ins and a lot of crossovers culturally with what's happening with thrash metal. You know, stuff like Society. Have you ever seen Society?
I love Society.
So good. And that's like basically Slayer the movie.
Yeah, that is tremendous.
Brain Damage, a lot of Cronenberg stuff.
But it's more satirical than Slayer.
But that's it. It's more satirical directly, but I feel like thrash metal is inherently not satirical, but it's inherently anti-establishment.
You know what's really bad? Is it not Billy? What's his name that's in it?
Billy Warlock.
I was watching Baywatch today.
So class. Can I give you? I'll give you a couple of quotes here just to back up my thoughts academically.
Please do.
So this is from.
We want page references.
I can stick the references in the episode tags.
Yeah, please send them to me.
Dina Weinstein interestingly remarks that there is an obvious similarity between speed and thrash metal's challenge to heavy metal and the consternation initiated by Martin Luther and John Calvin against the Catholic Church. Both movements charged that the establishment form became corrupt through extravagance, and both supported a return to the essential message, stripped bare of all adornment. In their clothing, their relationship to the followers, and their discourse, thrash bands and the early Protestant leaders parallel one another. It goes on for a while.
That's a very elegant metaphor.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
That's really nice. And also, they all hate the Jews.
This is another one. Metal fans and performers find meaning in deviance and alienation.
Deviance.
Deviance and alienation from dominant culture. Brown, 1995, examined secular and Christian thrash metal contexts and musical parameters, seeing thrash in particular as an aesthetic response to oppression. Heavy metal and thrash is often used as a cathartic musical experience whereby youth transcend their frustrations with a social system on which they exert little or no control.
Also interesting.
Yeah.
Not quite as elegant.
Not quite as elegant, but
Yeah.
politically interesting.
Probably holds up to repeated.
But then what's interesting, like you could talk to, David Cronenberg or the directors of those horror movies, and they would say, yeah, this is what I'm trying to satirize. Whereas you speak to Tom Araya, did critics realize that you were wallowing in parody? No, people thought we were serious. We were just trying to scare people. They were trying to do it for shock value, but
And it worked.
and it did work. They weren't taking it seriously as people thought. They didn't have a political.
The thing is,
goal.
yeah, they were sort of swim. I don't want to say first wave outrage culture, because obviously outrage culture is something that goes right back through human history, right? But they were swimming in the first wave of postmodern outrage culture.
They've done the PMRC.
The
you know what I
PMRC,
mean? Like,
the Satanic Panic, and all these things. Right, we'll touch on the Satanic Panic actually, because that's really interesting regarding this band. But people were looking to interpret them literally, all right, with regards to Satan and the devil and all that kind of stuff. And you know what? There may well be a bit of sincerity to it, but it's all just born of rebellion and working class frustration and just a little bit of nihilism and stuff. And it doesn't behoove anyone to take it at any sort of level that is particularly malicious. It's not about that. It's an outlet. It's a vent. It's an emergency venting system for people that have very constraining lives and jobs that are unsatisfying, and they need this outlet to survive. If you it's so bizarre that within the capitalist system, it's things like this that do allow the system to continue functioning, because
it's an outlet.
It's an outlet,
yeah, it's like
and yet
vent.
so many of the people at the top of it continually question it, and you're like,
Yeah,
you fool! If you want your system to continue,
exactly.
give them that. If nothing else, it's so bizarre.
And also, you can obviously look at these guys, and especially when they're like playing later in their career, and you're like, oh, I can't believe they're still singing about the devil. They're 50 years old, and do they really take that seriously? And it's like, well, that's their jobs, and they started that band when they were 16. Literally, Jeff, Dave, and Kerry were all 15 or 16 when Slayer started. Tom was a couple of years older. And like all these kids in these bands started when they were 17, 18, and they were just like, yeah, fuck it, I'm just gonna sing about the devil, who cares? They don't have a thought process.
There's no
behind
agenda.
it.
Yeah.
There's no agenda. And then once you start doing that, obviously there will be artists that then decide to develop artistically and creatively and go down other routes,
kill their band members with,
or
yeah, that does happen.
but then there's our guys that just keep doing their job.
it's that thing. It starts in such an unpretentious fashion that I, even as they get older doing it, I personally, as cynical as I can be, I don't have any issue with it. It's like, it was dumb as shit at the start, it's dumb as shit now. It's just, it is what it is. Let it be what it is.
It's also like a homage to the things that they enjoyed when they were at that age as well. Like Black Sabbath and Venom and all these schlocky kind of bands, and the Misfits. I don't know how big of a fan Slayer were of Misfits, but it would be hard to think they weren't, because Metallica definitely were. And we've spoken about them at length. You know what I mean? They were just schlock horror for the sake of it.
See, in terms of recontextualising it, you mentioned horror films and 80s horror films. Nobody questions whether or not anybody should be able to make slasher movies. Now, it's like, Wes Craven started making slasher movies, and then he made slasher movies right up and almost up until his death.
Yeah,
it's like, it's a perfectly valid genre. Like, metal is like that. It's like a snapshot genre. You go to it for a certain thrill and a certain buzz, and yet it's stupid. Slasher movies are stupid, and some of them are done better than others, and some of them are a little bit nasty, and others are totally harmless, right? And that's just all it is. There's nuance within that, right? But just slasher movies is a valid thing, just like fucking dumb thrash metal singing about the devil is a fucking valid thing. If you don't get it, that's fine, but don't question its fucking validity. It's just there. Can I drag it away from the sort of the meta conversation and take it down to the specifics?
Yeah, of course.
Something that really makes people are like, what is it though? What does it sound like? It's fucking fast.
Yes.
So it's metal played really fucking fast, and there's certain styles that are inherent to the genre, and one of those is a guitar style called shredding. And I did a little bit of digging on shredding, because it's always just been there. You take it for granted. It's just shredding,
Yeah.
So if you're not familiar with it, I'll cut in some samples of it, okay? But it is a frantic style of soloing associated with metal and thrash in particular. Slayer, the band in question, are famous for even trading shredded solos. If you're listening in headphones, you'll hear one guy in the right, one guy in the left, having the little go at it themselves. To pick the actual technique apart a little bit, pardon the pun, shredding uses a variety of techniques: sweep picking, tremolo picking, tapping, dives, pull-offs and trills. The rhythm of the picking often either matches or forms what they call polyrhythms with the track, and quite often the kick drum in particular, because double kick is another big part of this. So you'll have the track will be going at a certain BPM, and it'll either complement that or it'll bounce off it in a way that's musical in and of itself. Shredding also shifts along some really complex scales between keys. It incorporates a lot of aspects of jazz and the kind of free nature of it, because sometimes sounds really messy, but it's a very controlled mess.
And atonal as well.
And atonal, and it also includes a lot of kind of Baroque classical influences, that Rachmaninoff type really busy approach, or was it Stravinsky? He's another one that used to do that really
and Bach as well.
So it's got a lot of that Baroque element to it, and it's maybe not something that these people, the guitarists, would articulate, but within that kind of atonality and that mess and that jazziness, there's a knowingness. There's a deal like I'm almost letting this go off the rails, but I'm letting it go off the rails because I'm so good. And Steve Vai, very famous guitarist, obviously described shred really well, I think. He said it's the terminology used for someone who can play an instrument and has such a tremendous amount of technique that what they do just seems completely effortless and absurd. It's like this burst of energy that just comes out in extremely fast, tearing kind of playing where the notes actually connect.
I was going to say, it's funny you mentioned it feels like it's going to fall apart, because I can't remember what album I read it about, but one of the Slayer records, maybe Gary Holt, when he was doing some stuff on the new Slayer albums, and I think it was Terry Date said to him, he was just playing the guitar solos over and over again, doing take after take after take, and I think Tom Araya came in and said, the first one is the right one, and he's like, you need to come in and tell me this shit, because I could do it all day because I'm such a perfectionist. And then Terry Date was like, see, when it feels like it's going to fall apart, that's the one. When it feels like it didn't quite fall apart, but it feels like it's going to fall apart, and you keep it in time, that's usually the best take.
Yeah, it's right in the end.
Well, that's kind of what I feel is sort of intangible to me about a lot of the best thrash metal, and also I guess just a lot of the best music, certainly heavy music, which is played to the limits, is that element of chaos, but that is often very technically proficient chaos, and they know exactly what they're doing. Yeah, it's I never really thought about that in terms of shredding, but that's exactly what Slayer do, particularly on the three records that are seen as
a really interesting records. Place for an instrument to end up, because I can't really think of many analogies with regards to. Well, actually, you know what? I take this back. Actually, I can think of analogies where saxophone,
I was going to say
drums do
jazz,
but it's jazz, isn't it? It's specifically
jazz, brass,
and there isn't quite that same emphasis on both conformity and absurdity, because the conformity is the speed. It has to be fast, it has to have certain tropes, like the dive bomb, where you take a whammy bar and you bend it and you're effectively shortening the strings momentarily so the whole thing pitches down. That got increasingly more dramatic. I did a little dig into like where that actually seems to have come from. A very, very back of a postage stamp history of shred would be that in the 1950s there's a track called How High the Moon by Les Paul, the guy that the guitars are named after, alongside a singer called Mary Ford. It's one of the first tracks, and certainly one of the most prominent early tracks, to feature sweep picking. That was in the 50s. The next kind of really significant noticeable step forward in 68, Deep Purple released a track called Highway Star.
I fucking love that song, man.
Yeah. Really famous song, great song actually, with like loads of like really virtuoso moments in it. Right, but Richie Blackmore, the guitarist, is certainly to the forefront of those. He does one of the first really popular, prominent examples of shredding. I think he did the similar in Rainbow. He did it in a couple of Deep Purple songs. He did it in Rainbow a bit as well. 1969, Led Zeppelin, a band who I'm not a fan of, write and release a track called Heartbreaker. Heartbreaker is a really good, concise kind of encapsulation of a lot of these weirder techniques that we described, like hammer-ons and pull-offs. Jimmy Page just goes to fucking town on these really bizarre experimental guitar techniques within...
I love that song as well.
He's got so much scope because of who they were to really go wild with these solos. Now, I don't like the arrangement, but you can really hear the bizarreness of what he's trying to do in it, and it is pretty innovative. It is a long fucking solo. And there are also some really frantic and, as you said, like atonal, like I would say bizarre again, passages of speed picking in that solo. There's a live version of it that's worth watching if you want to really see that in action. In 74, the band Scorpions, really interesting band in their own right, for a variety of reasons that we'll maybe get into in future, they released an album called In Trance, and the guitarist that had joined, I don't think he'd been in the band that long, maybe 2 albums at that point, a guy called Ulrich Roth. There's a track called Dark Lady, I'll cut it in, combined loads of these different ingredients that we're talking about for maybe the first time in one place. Especially the depth of his whammy dive bombs. He was really bending that bridge, you know, really bringing it up and getting his kind of really ostentatious sound that he did, and then a whole load of crazy scales. So that went a long way to forming one of the first early definitive versions of shredding, I guess. It probably didn't have a name at that stage. And then in 78, Eddie Van Halen and Van Halen release Eruption. Eruption is basically one big fuck off solo that segues into their cover of You Really Got Me, but it's incredibly famous and totally archetypal for a lot of that stuff. And then in the 1980s, metal and thrash lift a lot of these techniques from what is effectively a kind of blues rock context. Certainly Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin, it's much slower, and they usually took place in these big self-indulgent standalone moments, and they started to integrate it into much faster music that was played as fast as the musicians could possibly go, and there was a lot of brevity in the shredded solos. They were in and out pretty fast. So it kind of has this really odd genesis, but then this thrash scene really grabbed it and made it its own, and it's something that's really synonymous with it. When you hear a shredded solo, it's like, oh, it's a thrash solo.
Yeah, totally.
There's another element of Slayer which I think sets them apart from every other metal band of the 80s era and our contemporaries, and that's Dave Lombardo's a drummer as well, because he's a fucking tremendous drummer. It
is funny you should mention that, because my next page of notes is called Lombardo versus Bostaph. Well, okay, but let me just add one addendum. Kerry King says one of the best shredders he's ever seen was Rivers Cuomo.
Heard that.
Yeah.
I played backstage at Download Festival playing through a tiny guitar amp, one of the best guitar players he's ever heard in his life.
Yep. So there you go.
But that's because Rivers Cuomo probably sat as a teenager and playing Slayer riffs.
Solos,
yeah, exactly.
Within them all.
So Mark,
all the Kiss stuff, you know. Yeah.
Lombardo versus Bostaph. Who wins? Go.
Lombardo easily.
Dave?
I mean, obviously Lombardo. Yeah. Okay. So
but not just because. Do you want me to go into my point just now?
Please do. But
so, I mean, Lombardo's more influential. Like his technique and style of playing, nobody else was really doing at that time. There are better drummers out there for sure.
The polka beat.
Yeah.
Do you know about the polka beat?
Like the shuffle.
If you look up Dave Lombardo polka beat, you'll see him. He does a lot of drum workshops, and he actually starts off with a really cheesy polka beat like you would get on a Casio keyboard, and then he speeds it up and speeds it up and speeds it up. By the time he's sped it up to as fast as he can go, you're like, oh, that's a Slayer beat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many great things about him which make him quite remarkable in of this era as well, which Paul Bostaph does actually build upon as a player, I think. Apart from the obvious speed, right, which is average 220 BPM, he was doing that with his legs, not with his feet, which is like fucking intense workout.
Well, he's nicknamed the Godfather of double bass.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just that, but apparently he was incredibly precise. He never played a click and he never missed a fucking beat, which is insane.
In his entire life.
Well, and the,
Yeah,
and the recordings.
not one single beat.
And he's still, just like he's a human metronome. It's the way he approaches drums. Like he plays off the solos a lot more than a lot of other drummers do. He's a lot more dynamic than I think people realise. Paul Bostaph is great technically, but he's not as dynamic, I don't think, and I think you can hear that.
Well, of course, what is interesting though is that Gene Hoglan teched for them for a little bit and gave Dave some tips on how to do the double bass.
Wow.
So, Dave might be the father, but Gene is the grandfather.
Yeah, it's interesting that Mark's saying that he doesn't think Dave's he's like, there's better drummers out there in the world, because I mean, Dave Lombardo has been voted number one in a whole load of best metal drummers ever.
When I listen to it, I think it's a little bit messy. Like Gene Hoglan, for instance, is just a fucking battery. He's a machine when you hear that, and there's no sort of differentiation between his hits. Whereas Dave is like pushing it, and some are slightly louder than others and stuff, but for me that's much like shredding. I love that chaotic energy that he brings,
and that's that kind of analog punkier quality away from the techie metal. I mean, he's got a much more human touch to it. Drumthat.com, Revolver Mag, there was a bunch, had him at number one, ahead of people like Danny Carey, Vinnie Paul, within the kind of canon of metal. Loudwire had a huge poll and they had him at number 4, one place ahead of Danny Carey and just behind Neil Peart. So I mean, he's obviously brilliant. I mean, he's played with John Zorn, he plays with Phantomas. He's an incredible musician. Played in the Misfits, Suicidal Tendencies, Phantomas, Dead Cross, Mr. Bungle. Performed with Apocalyptica, or Apocalypta, is that right? John Zorn. He performed with Testament. He's very, very highly thought of, and also seems to be quite popular with a lot of other musicians on a personal level. They seem to want to go back and work with him. There's some interesting stuff behind it. He quit Slayer, I think initially due to an argument regarding royalties. That's actually quite interesting. I've seen him. It happened twice. He left. He technically left 3 times, I think. But one was just momentarily. Yeah. So the second time when he left before Jeff died, it was off because he gave him a royalty demand before just like a week before they went in the Australian tour, and they're like, no. Yeah, that was it. It's interesting though. See, when he digs into that, he did a drum workshop where somebody asked him a question about it, and he just went for it and answered it really honestly. Maybe he was a bit frustrated, but he said that in 2011 he'd actually gone and got a forensic accountant to go into the band's income, and from 4.4, I remember reading this at the time, $4.4 million reported income, the band got $400,000, and he said, why is that? How is that happening that we are getting such a low revenue share? And then he took that to the band, and he claims that the band took it to the label, and the band members, especially Kerry and Tom, were somewhat bought off, or their silence was bought. From their 2011 tour, which he said was about 90 dates, he made 67 grand the whole year, and he said that Kerry and Tom made 114 grand, so considerably more than him, but still not the numbers that you think of for a band as big as Slayer, selling 3,000-4,000 venues, 60 to 90 shows a year, and merch like out the fucking arse as well. Exactly. This is the thing I will say, when he's saying that, that's probably just fees. There's going to be a lot of royalties, a lot of PRS, a lot of like kind of things coming in over the top of that. I'm not suggesting for a minute that Dave Lombardo makes 67 grand a year. That's not the case, but just from shows that big, you expect these guys to be somewhat rolling in it. They are like the leading lights in that entire scene. So it does seem like he had some fairly valid complaints, and it certainly seems like at least the band mismanaged that, but they seem to have been able to get over it. It's one thing about this band, there seems to be a big emphasis on the personal relationships in it, not just not allowing drama to interfere with their relationships, and that's actually quite nice. We'll touch on that in a wee bit,
because they disagree all the time in the media about stuff. Like they'll talk about the same album and they'll completely disagree with each other.
Exactly.
And stuff like that,
there've been other controversies, but they've been like, well, this doesn't affect our friendship. No, we just don't agree in it, and that's quite cool. Paul Bostaph hasn't got quite the CV that Lombardo does. He played in Forbidden, Exodus, Testament, Systematic, amongst a few others. He had left Slayer after the God Hates Us All album due to a chronic elbow injury that I think at the time they weren't sure, would he be able to play at that level again. In a head-to-head poll of the two drummers, Metal Storm put Lombardo as a runaway winner. Some people, though, have acknowledged that they actually think Paul Bostaph might be a better overall technical drummer, but that Lombardo is certainly a more natural and definitive Slayer fit. Some others
bags of groove as well, Lombardo, which Bostaph doesn't quite have.
It's also maybe not mentioned that just how fucking fast Lombardo is. He's got 22 strikes in 2 seconds on one of their songs.
Holy fuck.
Yeah. So I think Lombardo is regarded as being the best overall. There's no love lost between the two, and that's in no small part due to Dave Lombardo, though. He's got a couple of really belters of fucking comments. He was replaced in Phantom Mass by Terry Bozzio after getting an injury, and he went on record as saying, "I want you to know something. I was honoured by the gesture of replacing me with Terry Bozzio. That to me was respect, instead of replacing me with a guy that hasn't done anything in 10 years, waiting on the couch fiddling his thumbs. Oh my god, when is Slayer going to get rid of Dave?" I will say it does. He could well have been talking about Joe Detti at the time, but you don't know. He didn't make it clear. He has chosen a number of occasions to not mention the current Slayer drummer, Paul Bostaph, referring to him as the other drummer or the other guy, and he's claimed in public that Slayer is currently missing that magic. In September of, I think it was, when was this, 2012 or something like that? 2014 it was, actually. Lombardo discredited Bostap's potential contributions to Slayer's next album, claiming that Bostaph was simply recording over Lombardo's parts he had been working on for years. Soon after, Lombardo claimed, if you want to listen to Slayer's upcoming album, you might as well pick up the last album, it's nothing new. Paul Bostaph been a bit more gracious in return. He did make the comment that in writing in Slayer, you don't get a lot of room to write as a drummer. He's like, Kerry, especially in the modern era, comes in, he wants you to do something, just wants you to do it. That's it, just do this.
Yeah.
There are a couple of moments where, as he describes it, you get to add colour, but generally you're given a set thing to do. He also said, I'm not going to call Dave the other guy. He's Dave Lombardo. In terms of the new record, I heard him say that he wrote all the parts in it for the drums. It's funny that I didn't see him anywhere around when I was working on the music, so it's one of those things where I get where he's coming from, but man, there's two sides to every story, and I'm getting a little tired of hearing this. I'm just going to leave it at that because I don't take it personally. So, props to Paul Bostaph. He was probably the bigger man in that occasion.
Yep.
Speaking of, we mentioned that when he says there that Kerry comes in and just kind of basically tells him what to do. Pretty much the exact same thing with Gary Holt as well. Like after Jeff passed away.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
he was not allowed to make music.
Yeah, because
he was allowed to do what he was told.
He keeps getting asked in podcasts. Like more recently, Gary Holt was like, "Oh, sorry, getting back together." I was like, "I don't know. I'll get a phone call."
Yeah, exactly. yeah.
I'm like, I can't answer that question. I'll just get a phone call.
So I don't know if you guys are aware, but there's a couple other bits and bobs of controversy.
Oh, are they?
45 minutes and we've just mentioned it.
Obviously, when Dave told us that we were going to do this record, I think one of the first things I sent to the group was a photo of Kerry King in a Confederate flag t-shirt with the slogan, "You wear your X and I'll wear mine." That said, I did want to qualify that by saying, apparently until he was about 21, Kerry King was effectively a straight edger. Like, he wasn't a straight edger, but he was drink and drug free, quite a clean loving guy. He's obviously not now, but he was for a long time. So it's kind of strange. And it did sort of seem, the way the X thing was written in that shirt, that it was a dig at straight edge. Yeah, more than anything. It's a Confederate shirt. It's tone deaf. I mean, I think it happened back in it
was in the 90s,
late 90s, and
peak Pantera.
Yeah, exactly. So, Confederate flag is a horrible symbol, but we were watching Dukes of Hazzard in the late 80s, So
he's anti-Trump. He was embarrassed.
Well, let's go sequentially here. To talk about the straight edge tie-in, I guess it's tangential to that. Slayer's cover of Minor Threats.
Oh yes,
Guilty of being white. So, Minor Threat song, Guilty of Being White, very famous old school American punk song. Slayer covered it, and they decided, as some sort of like weird punchline, to finish the track with the line "Guilty of Being Right." And that didn't go down well, least of all with Ian Mackay.
He was very annoyed.
Yeah, he said that is so offensive to me. Kerry King has maintained that it was totally tongue-in-cheek humour. He thought the allegations of racism were ridiculous, and it was all just a bit of trolling. That's fair enough. That's what he says. So the Trump thing. Basically, onto the public Slayer, was it on Instagram or was it Twitter? There was a photoshopped picture of the band with Donald Trump posted on the band's account, right? And this had actually been posted by Tom Araya. That was deleted, and then Tom Araya reposted it with a comment kind of into the ether, demanding to know why it had been taken down in the first place. Now, this is the thing. So Kerry King is, as you say, avowedly anti-Trump. So Kerry King had previously come out and told Rolling Stone that Hillary Clinton was the safe, correct choice for President of the USA. He's explained at the time on record, Trump is just a sideshow. I'm not even going to apologise to all the Trump followers. I think the reason he's so popular is because he's like the politics version of WWE. He's sensational, like wrestling, and that's why middle America loves him. He's the biggest liar I've ever seen in politics. I mean, most of them are liars, but he just outright in-your-face lies. His words were echoed by Gary Holt, the second guitarist, who described Donald Trump as a serial liar, especially after he refused to disavow Ku Klux Klan Grand Wizard David Duke. So Kerry King, this is one of those instances where the band are having a public disagreement, but Kerry King also commented, this doesn't affect how much I love Tom, I just really disagree with it, and the band account is not the place for that conversation. But he has repeatedly gone out and criticised Donald Trump, and that's kind of interesting. It's really fucking interesting, especially within the context of a very working class, down home American pickup truck beer drinking kind of like genre of music, like thrash metal, that somebody would go out and say that, because Kerry King knows that he's fucking pissing off a lot of their fan base by doing that. Although I suppose on the other hand, the fan base have got Tom Araya to latch onto, because he's such
but I mean, he specifically said, I'm not apologising to our fans. Like, I fucking hate Donald Trump.
Exactly.
I think in some ways it's probably not that surprising, because California is a liberal place. It's quite a liberal place. It's a democratic
Slayer
place,
is the thing is, Slayer is a California band in terms of origin, but in terms of aesthetic, Slayer is an Iowa band.
Oh yeah, totally. But I mean, like from a personal point of view, from a politics, that's not. I don't think that's too surprising for him to be like on that side of the.
I do, because the thing is, Gary Holt has said he mainly identifies as Republican. I mean, he severely dislikes a lot of the people that are classed as Republican, but he says in terms of policy and general, personal inclinations, he would tend to vote that way. I don't think it's a big leap to say that Kerry King is probably Republican. He's probably right of centre, but I don't mean that in any kind of defamatory way. I just mean it strikes me that he's probably minded that way. You don't, even in the late 90s wearing a Confederate shirt, it's very unlikely he's suddenly fucking like fully into like pronouns. I just, and that doesn't make the guy a bad person. It really doesn't. This is the thing. There has to be a bit of fucking shades of grey here,
especially with this band.
Yeah, especially this one. So, and another problem here is that Kerry King is very good friends with Phil Anselmo, to the extent where he actually refers to him as Philip in interviews, which I've never seen. But he, when quizzed on it, Kerry said, this is after Phil Anselmo. I mean, Phil Anselmo, let's be honest, has been involved in this for years, and the going on stage white power thing, saying that if they can say black power, why can't we say white power? The wearing the Rolling Sevens t-shirt thing that he did when Kurt Cobain died. The Rolling Sevens was like a carnivore, the band that Pete Steele was in, which was like a racist band, right? And Phil Anselmo has a fucking track record of this, so
totally.
C. Kylan was not
too much white wine, mate.
A massive change of form, right? But Kerry King was quizzed on it. He said, our racism controversy is all unwarranted. I've said since 1986, if Angel of Death was a documentary on History Channel, it would probably win awards, but Slayer said it, so they're racist. That's just people not knowing what things are about. Now, what Philip did, I wasn't there, but of course I've seen some of it. There's a line I think he crossed a little bit. Yeah, he may not come back from that. It was massive. Now, in fairness to Kerry King, in the context of thrash metal, in the context of that kind of redneck American following that he has, and in the context of this being his friend, kind of slightly impressed that he at least even said that, because, you know, he should say that, but a lot of people wouldn't.
Yeah.
And this is this thing, so there's, you know, tracks like Angel of Death and all this kind of stuff, and this spurious sort of suggestion that that's Nazism. Here is the fucking shock twist. The Nazism, racism thing with Slayer, it doesn't pass the smell test.
Absolutely not, never has.
No.
You know, and Slayer have got a lot of gaffes and missteps. As I say, I think they're broadly Republican aligned. I don't think I'm not warm on Tom Araya at all. I think Tom Araya is probably quite a fucking unlikable guy if you don't already know him. I strongly refute this notion that somehow he can be less racist because he's Chilean. Like, there's no fucking racism in the world outside of...
No, there are no right-wingers or racists in South America. We clearly know that.
So, I mean, that part of it really baffles me, that like, oh, well, he could be racist, but he's Chilean. What the fuck?
Well, that's what Kerry King is also very anti-theist and just hates organised religion of all types. So that's fine with Slayer because they are very anti-religious, whereas Tom is a practicing Roman Catholic and yet he's happy to sing all of this because that's his,
and write it as well.
Yeah, exactly. You know, he writes some of these lyrics because he is more of a hypocrite
and seems conservatively aligned, you know, more overtly so. So I think this whole idea of Slayer being some kind of like deeply problematic band, especially the more you look into it, it just doesn't hold up. And especially when you compare it to bands that don't get looked into in that depth, you know, so many, like countless fucking bands that don't get looked into in that depth that really are problematic. And I'm not trying to like say, excuse them of anything. Somebody might dig really deep and find some fucking problematic photo from back then, right? But if you think that Slayer are the fucking big problem with like white supremacy in America, get a fucking grip. They're not, and there has to be some sort of level of some nuance to the discussion around that. You know, they are not Burzum.
No, they're not.
They're fucking very fucking far from fucking Burzum.
Ironically, they are a lot less right wing than fucking Morrissey.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
I think there's a good case probably been made that they did have a huge influence in creating the bands that end up becoming racist just by dint of the music they were making, like fucking black metal, you know what I mean, which is clearly taking influence from the speed and aggression of this kind of stuff.
Yeah, but then who's more guilty of that than Venom? And Venom are fucking a bunch of like Labour voting fucking guys from
totally, exactly. I mean, you can't. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, you might have influenced it. You've not really got much of a say in who you influence, but there's definitely worse acts like Mayhem, for example.
So I just don't buy it. Another sort of controversial thing that dogged Slayer, especially in the 80s, was we've mentioned the Satanic Panic and the PMRC. Slayer were one of the bands that were caught up in this whole kind of the music is making people kill themselves, like when they played Judas Priest records backwards and tried to find like sort of people being entreated to commit suicide.
They did that, didn't they? With the start of Hell Awaits. Join us.
So a lawsuit was brought against the band in 1996, I'm quoting here, by the parents of Elise Paller. The parents accused the band of encouraging their daughter's murderers through their lyrics. Paller had been, and this is awful, had been drugged, strangled, stabbed, trampled and raped as some sort of sacrifice to the devil by 3 fans of Slayer. Let's put it clear, by 3 people who happen to be fans of Slayer.
Yep.
Yeah,
that's a big fucking difference.
It's like the same as the fucking Doom drove Columbine or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, no, these fucked up individuals did it and they happen to be interested in some things.
Yeah, there's a difference between causality
correlation
and correlation. Yeah. So the case was unsealed by the court on May 19th, 2000, stating Slayer and related business markets distribute harmful products to teens, encouraging violent acts through their lyrics, and quote, none of the vicious crimes committed against Elise Marie Paller would have occurred without the intentional marketing strategy of the death metal band Slayer. Thrash metal band Slayer. The lawsuit was, however, dismissed in 2001 for multiple reasons, including principles of free speech, lack of a duty and lack of foreseeability. A second lawsuit was filed by the parents, which was also dismissed by a judge called E. Jeffrey Burke, stating, I do not consider Slayer's music obscene, indecent or harmful to minors. Slayer fucking rocks! he maybe didn't say that last bit, but I think it's really interesting that the band were kind of exonerated from that because yes, there are numerous instances of people trying to tie crimes to the music of these bands, and a bit like the slasher movies, I would say a slasher movie is probably a far bigger incitement to commit horrible acts. But, you know, there is a level of absurdity that, especially when it's as pantomime as Slayer.
Well, I mean, you know, people can't deal with complexity, and they can't deal with the fact that people are psychologically damaged through a huge number of complex psychological and social reasons. So it's easy to blame the satanic band called Slayer.
Yeah.
Much like it's easy to blame all of the problems on immigrants. You know.
Yep. So one other detail I think we should just clear up, because we mentioned it earlier on before we talk about the albums, is Hanneman and his death. He died of cirrhosis of the liver failure. At the time he died, he'd actually been distanced from the band, I think, since about 2011. He died in 2013. This is really strange. He had been in a hot tub and he'd been bitten by an insect in the hot tub, which he thinks it was a spider, and he'd contracted.
A spider's not an insect. A spider's an arachnid.
We should dig him up and tell him.
Well, just letting you know.
You are absolutely correct. And Hanneman has to
take a tone for this crime.
Can we have a seance? just to set him right. Anyway, he contracted necrotizing fasciitis,
which is pretty serious business.
Pretty horrible condition. They actually at one point debated amputating his arm altogether, but it was treated intensively, and he did recover use of it. While he was out, Gary Holt from Exodus had stepped in. Now, Hanneman did eventually return to practice, and he'd come in and he'd play for a while, but he'd struggle, and then Kerry King describes him stopping and like fiddling with his guitar and clearly trying to like waste time because he was struggling. And then Kerry says he just eventually stopped coming to the practices. When he stopped going to rehearsals, they sort of lost touch. Gary Holt became fairly like de facto permanent replacement, and then Hanneman started drinking really heavily. 2013 he'd been readmitted to hospital. The band didn't even know this, I don't believe. He'd stopped replying to texts that Tom, who I think kept in fairly regular contact with him, had been sending. Tom said suddenly the texts, there was no responses, and then one day Araya, I think it was actually Tom Araya's wife, picked up the phone, and it was a call from their manager saying that Hanneman had died, and they didn't even know that this was going on. So it was quite a shock to the system, and yeah, a really fucking sad story. I mean,
apparently he was really unaware of how bad it was until like quite close to his death as well, like how bad the cirrhosis was of his liver.
But also just the whole thing with the bite and stuff, like, holy fuck.
But it's pretty fucking metal.
Yeah. To
die of flesh-eating disease caused by a spider bite, and then liver failure through alcohol,
and also to be bad at entomology.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you just live in the metal dream. Well, dying the metal dream.
Dying in the metal dream. There's a good title for next Slayer album. So do we skim through some of the shit about their albums? I mean, we don't want to dig into them too much because, frankly, folks, most Slayer albums sound like most Slayer albums, right?
Yeah.
I'm happy with the beast here.
So, like, we kick off in 1983 with their debut Show No Mercy. And it was recorded with absolutely no budget, not even a carpet in the drum room.
They recorded the drums without the cymbals.
Yeah,
to stop the bleed.
Did they not do that on Rain and Blood as well? Is it Rain and Blood or is it Seasons in the Abyss where they overdubbed the cymbal strikes?
I don't know, but this was done because of monetary reasons, not because it sounded better.
They didn't. Okay. Yeah, that wasn't Rick Rubin. That was literally, oh shit, yeah, we can't afford that. And I guess it came out just a couple of months after Kill 'Em All. And to me, it's actually a pretty fucking great record in terms of like old school thrash. It like stands up.
It's barely thrash, come on.
Well,
you know what it's got a lot of?
Yeah.
It's proto thrash, I would say. Like.
It's proto thrash, but it's fun to me.
Fun.
And it's like, I think the first 4 tracks are total belters. I think Metal Storm Face the Slayer is like proper.
That fucking title.
I know. It's like proper Iron Maiden sort of like big instrumental intro sort of stuff.
Can you redo the title just one more time, but properly?
Metal Storm / Face the Slayer.
Metal Storm /
Faceless Slayer. I think it sets the band up as like fast,
yeah,
angry, pretty fucking tight musically. Production is obviously quite cheap and light, but it's not awful. It's not like fucking Pantera's 80s records.
Yeah, it's the most melodic Slayer album, right? Because it's still got that sort of King Diamond, Judas Priest sort of feel kicking about, which Kill 'Em All had as well from Metallica.
Yeah, exactly.
This is something about Slayer, right? So I think obviously we talked about Slayer didn't modify their sound for like particularly commercial purposes, but one thing they also kept was that they maintained that straddling of the line between comedic and intimidating, with those high falsetto bits, because that was always the thing about metal. It was so preposterous that it was like people would be doing these falsetto huge kind of odes to Vikings and shit like that. It was so ridiculous, and Slayer maintained that thing for a long time.
Well, that's what when I think about why I like them more than I like Anthrax or Metallica or Megadeth, particularly Megadeth. It's because they take their silliness very seriously, whereas Megadeth. I mean, he obviously takes it very seriously, but he's also even sillier. I don't know. Yeah, Slayer just get it like the balance right for me.
Metallica also take themselves far too seriously for what they are.
Aye,
no doubt about it.
Did Metallica do that same silly like OTT thing though?
Yeah, there wasn't as much warbling, I guess.
Yeah,
they were a bit more punky about it.
Yeah.
But
I like the Antichrist in that. Because it's got that Judas Priest kind of feel.
Aye, totally.
Black Magic is a classic. I think they still played that right up until the end.
They then released an EP called Haunting the Chapel.
I love it.
Which saw them sort of progress a bit darker, a bit tighter, a bit faster. Quite a few bands, including Chuck from Death and stuff like that, see that EP is very, very influential.
Yeah, no, I didn't realise that Slayer had such an influence on Chuck Schuldiner. And
Well, that's interesting, and especially, I guess we'll come to Rain and Blood, but they obviously are one of the core bands in thrash, but they also kind of invented death metal in many ways. Like, so many death metal bands say we would not be here without Slayer. So yeah, in 1985, Hell Awaits, their second studio record. Bit darker, bit more varied, sort of slightly more unusual arrangements. And yeah, you feel that they're sort of creating their own sound that's less straightforward, proto-thrash, a bit more evil. And it is quite an interesting record in terms of death metal as well. I'd say that's the one that you can sort of see, you know, bands like, I don't know, Morbid Angel and Testament, you know, sort of take a lot from that.
Can I just say, we're about to get to a big one, and as usual, I went through some of the lists of Slayer albums, you know, in order, and without fail, on every single list, the top two albums were either the next one or Seasons in the Abyss. Every single time it was one of the two, and almost every single time the album you've chosen, South of Heaven, was number three. So this is we're talking about Rain and Blood, their third ever album, and what an album.
Yeah, I mean, it's a trilogy, right? It's just
the unholy trilogy. The unholy trinity. Yeah.
Well, obviously a classic, as you've just said, Chris. They kind of, so I think Hell Awaits is probably a bit more technical. They've kind of stripped it back a little bit here. They've kind of went a lot more aggressive, a lot more punk. Yeah, but it's still quite. When I say less technical, it's still pretty fucking technical. I mean, fucking.
It'd be hard to play this.
Yeah, very hard to play.
I think this is the album that's got the 22 strikes in 2 seconds.
Yeah, probably. So we should also mention it's the first of the 3 produced by Rick Rubin. He also did a few later ones. But
This is wild. So this was total news to me. They were on Def Jam.
Yeah.
What
So it was
the
really
fuck?
interesting reading about like how this album came to fruition, and they had to really push to get the suits to release it. It was pushed from label to label. Rick Rubin was like, I really fucking want to work with these guys, and he'd been doing stuff with hip hop and everything. And Slayer were like, who is this guy? He doesn't have a metal sort of history. But yeah, I guess it just sort of they had trust in each other.
Some big names from Def Jam, Mark.
Run DMC.
I mean, it's fucking
Huge.
wild to think of that. I mean, one of the things, I know there was a bit of like, what would you call it, apprehension on the part of the band, but like, apparently Rubin didn't ask them to shorten the songs. You know, he was very chilled about it. The only thing he did was that he did a remix of a track called Criminally Insane, where like they used electronic percussion. And it was like kind of remixed in a hip hop style where like the drums were much louder on it, and that he didn't want to fuck with it. He didn't want to make them feel like they weren't allowed to be themselves. So it is what they wanted.
Yeah, I mean, you had LL Cool J, Beastie Boys, Redman, Warren G, Slayer.
It's so weird, man.
Yeah, because Kerry King played in a couple of Beastie Boys tracks, didn't he?
Yeah.
Quite interesting. But yeah, come on, let's talk about Angel of Death.
I mean,
Angel of Doubt, Monarch to the kingdom of the dead, infamous, watch out, Angel of Doubt.
the thing is, this record is bookended by possibly the 2 greatest thrash songs of all time. Angel of Death is just fucking... Oh, it's so good. I used to play it quite often as the last song at a DJ night. And when you've been listening to hip-hop and then you put this on, it's like... Oh. But, I mean...
The production's amazing on this record, right?
Yeah, Rick Rubin really turns this band into something special because he just makes the most of it. Makes everything so clear, so crisp. They can play fast, but you get every note. Oh, just their little stops and their little... Oh,
the chokes and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that, yeah.
Lombardo's particularly innovative on this record, right?
Yeah.
The whole foundation of what becomes, I guess, modern metal drumming happens on this album. The double kick it in and of itself is a thing of absolute marvel.
It's furious, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just it's a standard technique now. The gravity blast beats, standard technique.
Yeah.
Highlighting, accenting on the solos, standard technique. Nobody was doing that at the time.
It's kind of interesting. One thing about it, I do agree that the production works well with it, right? But Kerrang voted it the heaviest album of all time.
Yeah.
Right. I don't find Slayer they don't sound like a heavy band for me, and this was just a very quick phenomenon I just wanted to examine. Nowadays, when we make a band heavy, or when someone tries to make a band heavy, the production is intense. It's like things are buried, things are like peaking everywhere. There's a lot of reverb to create a sort of sense of scale. Cult of Luna maybe are a good example, or stuff like Unholy the Thrash. The production is heavy, like the production is actually offensive. This isn't actually offensive in its production, it's quite clear.
No, and you listen to the guitars, it was particularly on these next these 3 records, the distortion is not up full, it's not cranked up, scooped, you know.
By modern standards, it isn't actually a heavy production, it's just about the music. So when Kerrang say that, there's a bit of deference to the status of Slayer.
Trapped in purgatory, a lifeless object alive, awaiting reprisal. Death will be their acquiescence. Sky is turning red. Return to power, toss near. Follow to me, the skies.
But people listening to it now, if you're not invested in it, you might think this isn't heavy, this is just whatever. But try and imagine it in context at the time, and also try and imagine what a departure the music, the speed, the density of the music was.
And imagine it live as well, particularly in the later days.
Yeah, exactly.
That was all about it.
Before we skip past it as well, can I just share a little interesting bit of trivia that was right? So this is a huge album for them. It's sold millions now, right? But not at first.
Yep.
And apparently this got to 500,000. That's what platinum. 500,000. The exact same day that South of Heaven got to 500,000.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
That's
6
crazy.
years later.
Yeah, and like a couple of songs that I think are worth highlighting on this. The whole record really is worth highlighting, but
Yeah.
I wanted to pull out Auto Sacrifice, which I think is a screamer.
Satan's slaughter ceremonial death. Answer his every command. Death will come easy, just close your eyes.
Yeah.
Especially the way that it kind of rolls right into Jesus Saves, which is like this big, groovy, nasty motherfucker. Some real crunching riffs in that I love. Criminally Insane is really great. I love Postmortem. The opening riff's actually quite catchy, I think. But obviously the way it segues right into Rain and Blood as well is just something else. Really is.
And I mean, Necrophobic is so fast it's untrue. I just love that. It's like, that is foolish. So then 2 years later they did South of Heaven, which we'll be coming back to.
Then it's the other biggie, Seasons in the Abyss, 1990.
Going slow.
Well,
I don't agree.
I think they've speeded it up from
Seasons
of the Best.
No spoilers, but you know, South of Heaven is a slow album, and this, as I understand it, is a synthesis of South and Rain.
Yeah, to me, it's like the last great thrash metal of the era. I mean, it's 90s. It's from 1990, but it's basically about to be swept away. It's the last with Dave Lombardo for 16 years. Like, the 80s was the decade of thrash, and you kind of needed the context of that time for it. But obviously everything else was coming in. You had grunge, you had other types of metal, new metal. So like, this was when Slayer were important and vital and fun, and this was the last great record. It's pretty fucking good.
It is good. I don't think the production's as good as Rain and Blood. I think their drums are far too high in the mix for me anyway, and I don't think it's as crisp or as clear as Rain and Blood.
There's, once again, I think it's bookended.
Yes,
War Ensemble is a total fucking
good.
classic,
So good.
and I think Seasons in the Abyss is a big fucking classic slow metal banger.
Even as a metal ignoramus, I'm aware of that song.
Top 5 best Slayer song Seasons in the Abyss easily.
Yeah, probably. I don't think it reaches the heights of the previous two records for me.
It regularly tops fan polls.
Fan polls, it's up there, but we'll discuss that when we discuss it.
There's an interesting bit of trivia about track 8 in that, by the way, Temptation. There's an overdub of Tom Araya singing. And it wasn't intentional initially. Like, he'd done a version and then he did another version, and apparently Kerry King heard the two of them getting played back together and was like, I'll just leave it like that. And that's why it's that.
Because one of them was the way Araya was wanting to sing it, and one of them was the way that King wanted him to sing it,
and they just kept them both.
Because I think like one of them was like in the left channel, like all distorted and crushed, and then the other was like right up front, and it's a really weird thing, but it's cool.
There you go, super fans.
And then I guess you're past peak Slayer forever.
Then you're going through, and as you said, there's a lot of other things start to influence them, because you've got grunge. I mean, Nirvana exploded in 1991. I mean, metal had also obviously been like quite a pantomime preening affair for a long time, and Slayer were never a preening band. They were like cut off sleeves and spots and beer guts and stuff. They were not that kind of like tight leather Twisted Sister kind of band. And Nirvana then came along and sold a lot of other things and swept that away, and Slayer got a little bit lost in the mix.
I think the band that sort of wiped the floor with, or not wiped the floor with Slayer, but like sort of downgraded Slayer from their perch was Pantera. And then I guess Machine Head,
because Pantera were playing like Slayer played at the wrong speed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You discovered a new type of heaviness. It was slow, and you did have that fucking cranked up, scooped out metal sound. And on a Vulgar Display of Power, you had like really fucking slow riffs, just like down here, 1-2 fret.
Yeah,
and that was a new type of heaviness that Slayer were not au fait with.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's a couple other things I think that come into play here, because Slayer then start to kind of get a little bit confused about who Slayer are. Lombardo went out in 1992, and Paul Bostaph came in, and his first recording with him was a medley of exploited covers for the Judgment Night soundtrack with Ice-T doing vocals.
Our government is fucked. Sure to bring us down. The media incite civil unrest. Hatred can bring you down. Whoa!
And that's actually really informative, because not long after that they did the Undisputed Attitude record, which was them also just covering punk tracks that they'd come from, and it seems pretty likely that they got that sort of idea from that one experiment for Judgment Night. By the way, we've done an episode on Judgment Night. We did a movie soundtracks mixtape that you can go back and listen to. I think it was in the second year.
Yeah.
The Bostaph era at this point, I think, is a bit dubious. Divine Intervention, 94. That is literally against the backdrop of peak grunge. That is like your Smashing Pumpkins, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Nirvana have brought out In Utero. Grunge,
and then also Korn have just released their debut album. And so you've got a whole other movement coming.
Yeah, bands like Rage Against the Machine are big. I guess the metal bands that they're probably hearing are going to be coming from Scandinavia as well. So
it's also the black metal scene. Yeah, they'd been out extremed at this point by something else.
So when you listen back to it, it's solid, but it just lacks a spark.
It's also got the worst production as
and
well.
The production is so because they've
bad.
tried to make it modern, but it's really quiet.
Diddlehead is probably one of my favourite Slayer songs, though.
Nothing to regret. Unimposing policy. No enforcement.
I think it's one of their fastest songs.
It is, that's very punk.
Yeah, which I like a lot.
Using Bostaph's chops. So 96, we mentioned they brought out Undisputed Attitude. I think the band have referred to that as their biggest mistake. It does tend to rank pretty low in lists. And then 98, there's an interesting moment. They bring out Diabolus in Musica. And in the fan lists, that album is only slightly less hated on average than Undisputed Attitude. It's an interesting record though, because as we were talking about, Dave, I think the new metaliness of it is fucking grossly overstated. It is absolutely not that bad. I am not a Slayer fan, right? But I'm being objective. I can absolutely listen to it. It's fine. It's fine. It has some moments that you're like, okay, that's very of its time. It has these kind of, I think you gave the example of Soulfly probably being quite close. Like,
Yeah, there's a
it has
couple of riffs like that, and there's a couple of drum beats,
weird drum beats that
are like, oh,
Yeah.
that sounds like new metal. But there's no fucking decks, there's no DJ scratching, there's no rapping.
Exactly.
You know,
There's-
it's still, and it's very much a
there's
thrash
no
metal
Linkin
record.
Park fucking sung chorus. I
Yeah.
mean, it's not. Yeah, exactly. The new metaliness of that album is horribly overstated, and I think, frankly, it gets a bit of a tough time because, fuck, I don't know, man. I mean, fans are fickle, aren't they? Especially the purists. What they did do after that was an album called God Hates Us All, and the strange thing is, as somebody that's not a Slayer fan, if somebody was to just say, right, Chris, we're going to put on a Slayer record, that would probably be the one I'd choose.
We spoke about this before we did the podcast, and if I was doing Slayer, I probably would have picked this record.
Yeah.
Pessimist, terrorist, targeting the next bar. Global chaos, he ain't on his there yet. Cut those futurist, shoot you in the back,
But upon listening to it for this, it also has shockingly bad production. It sounds so compressed. It's fucking
That's
horrible.
for me. That's the problem with it.
I don't actually agree. I don't mind the production of it.
Well, so I feel that this is the only actually modern Slayer record where that it's got properly modern sounding production, thick guitars, and it's kind of fresh and sharp and sparkly
It is that,
to an
for
extent,
sure.
you know. And it's a big metal as fuck record with big chuggy riffs. You know, you can hear the stuff that's been influenced by Pantera and you know, that sort of stuff. But it is also proper thrashy and fast too. It is still very much a Slayer record.
I think it's kind of a sweet spot for them. I notice also that in the front cover they completely trolled people because they put 4 crosses in the kind of points of the compass, but also 4 crosses in the points of the compass creates a swastika if you want to delete
that
certain
was the
things.
second cover. The first cover was like a Bible with Slayer.
Yeah,
and
it
blood
just
like
had
that.
yeah.
So
That was the least offensive of two options.
but, honestly, regarding that album, I think actually, as much as I'm not a big fan of Tom Araya, I think that's one of his best albums. Like,
I mean,
would agree.
he's got some hooks on that actually.
Disciple, oh my god, I fucking love that song so much.
The pitching of his vocal in it as well is really complimentary. Like, it really works for the age of his voice.
Just tell me fucking why everything becomes an issue. Your opinion is always senseless. Fuck this shit, make my fucking skin crawl. I live with ink and dead anymore. My worst nightmare.
It's energetic, it's aggressive without being too much. Like, I really didn't mind it, and you know, it's sort of sunk into the pack a little bit. And
I enjoy it. I think it's heavily weighted towards the first half of the record.
I agree.
I think like the first 6 or 7 are
there's a
great,
couple of
and then the
stinkers
last 5 are a bit meh.
Well, Warzone's great, and that's towards the end. I think it's like track 9. That's
There's a couple of stinkers towards the end, but there's some really decent moments earlier on.
And do you know what? There's like maybe like 5 or 6 standout tracks on that I would put on a best of like compilation. I really like that record.
What was the track you mentioned?
Disciple.
Was it not Disciple that missed out on a Grammy to Schism by Tool?
It might
I can imagine.
I think it was.
It's actually it's almost got a hook. Some songs are like that. They've almost got like a hook, which I quite like.
But the thing for me that production wise is I think it just lacks that range because it never goes quiet, and it never has that. You know,
the waveform is probably like a square for the whole thing.
So after that, they teamed up with of all people, Atari Teenage Riot.
For the
Spawn soundtrack, a track called No Remorse. And the thing is, you know what? I think Slayer on that track are really fucking good. If anything is dated on that track, it's the kind of weird drum and bass that Atari Teenage Riot bring in.
Yeah.
But overall,
the sound of the bass on that. Like, that's a heavy song.
It's a good sounding song.
Yeah.
Like, it's just a pity that the beats are so off their time because it's actually not bad. And Slayer come out of that track, that pairing, pretty well. I mean, I don't know how reviews at the time reacted to it because I know the Spawn soundtrack got a bit of criticism, but honestly, I think Slayer's contribution is pretty decent.
Yeah.
And then
there was a bit of time they were touring, blah blah blah, and then they sort of They got Dave back.
Yep.
They went old school Slayer again, and they came back in 2006 with Christ Illusion. And I went to see them on this tour.
You did?
I had
Where about?
at the SEC.
Was that with Hatebreed and Mastodon and Slipknot?
No, it was with In Flames and Children of Bodom.
I saw them. I saw them. They were.
They did that. Was that not at the Academy?
No, it was in the SECC,
Oh, right.
but they'd moved it to a smaller room in the SECC. Not the
okay.
big one. But yeah.
Well,
I don't know.
I originally had tickets to Tattoo the Planet in 2001
Wow.
with Slayer, Pantera, and Biohazard and Cradle of Filth and a couple others.
Machine
I
Head
just
as
think
well,
about
right?
all those
Yeah.
bastards in one room.
And then, fucking hell, 9/11 happened and it was cancelled.
That's so inconsiderate.
So inconsiderate.
So to me, that's the worst thing.
Can I
that
just
should
say-
be-
Speaking of 9/11, a song about 9/11 on Christ Illusion called Jihad.
Okay. Yeah, there is.
So Christ Illusion, I mean, it's them going old school again. Like, to me, After God Hates is always modern. This is like, it sounds like that production. They've turned the distortion down a little bit on their guitars. I remember people, well, probably just Kerrang, because that's what I read, were like, oh, it's great, it's Slayer back to their best. And I was
It
like,
does get good write-ups, man.
it gets good write-ups, and I think it's fine. It's got a few belters, like Flesh Storm's good. Eyes of the Insane is good.
Yeah.
I love the big riff that goes half time in Jihad. It's pretty solid, but I never really go back to it. I never go, oh, I want to listen to Christ Illusion, because I'll just listen to South of Heaven instead.
Yeah.
Or, that's the thing with Slayer.
Kerry acknowledges that, doesn't he?
Totally.
So-
And it's fair. And like, I guess we then go to World Painted Blood in 2009 and
By the way,
Repentless.
They won the Grammy for Eyes of the Insane.
Yeah, that's true. That was their first and only Grammy.
Yeah.
And like, their three last records
Are fine.
are fine. They're Slayer records, and that's what they sound like. I'd love to say I was still giving Slayer big proper listens on these last two records especially, but neither really hooked me in.
World
But
Painted
then-
Blood is a bit more punky, I think.
Yeah.
Snuff is pretty cool. I like that. Feels like an old Slayer song.
And then, I think Jeff was gone for Repentless, so it was
Did you say
just
there was one song on Repentless that was a Hanneman tune?
Yeah, piano wire.
Piano Wire, yeah.
Lifeless now is innocence victorious. Do you think I won't touch your grave? Devotion to all insane. If war is lost, you'll die before I. Without dignity for all to see.
Right, okay. And the rest of it's pure Kerry.
All Kerry.
Yeah.
And they're
Even the
not,
lyrics.
not terrible records. but-
Bostaff back in now.
Yeah, Bostaff was
yeah,
the
yeah.
drummer,
Yeah.
like from
Or not
World
now,
Painted
but
Blood.
until
Yeah,
2019.
World Painted Blood, yeah.
What do you think Slayer, what does Slayer do now that they've retired as Slayer?
Well, apparently
Golf.
Kerry
Play
King,
golf.
Kerry King keeps saying that he's going to be doing, like, he's going to come back and do the Big Four, but with his own solo stuff, which
Oh,
is
yeah.
not going to be, which is going to be like Slayer but better. He keeps saying, and he's been talking about it for the past fucking 5 years.
To be honest, whenever I look through the songwriters, all my favourite songs are by Jeff. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
so Kerry was like the loudmouth and the sort of the leader of the band, but Jeff was, to me, the one that wrote most of the great riffs.
I think Tom Arias turned into a C shape because his back is just fucked. From
Yeah, C for conservative.
holding that heavy bass all the time.
So I guess we should talk about South of Heaven.
Be my guest. I don't have a lot to say.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Everything sounds the same. So and that is not a diss. Kerry
No.
knows everything sounds the same.
Totally. Well, do you know what's funnily enough? What turned me back onto Slayer recently was, I think it was on NTS the radio. There was an hour-long radio show of Slayer songs that were used in skate videos.
Oh, okay.
Right, and it just came on in my work. It was on after some.
Do you remember those videos used to be in Channel 5?
Aye, totally. And I was there with Ryan Drever, who's into, thrash and punk and stuff.
And skating.
And we were listening to this, and just like fucking every song was a banger. And we were just like, man, Slayer are fucking great. And then, because I was never a huge Slayer fan before, I appreciated them. And I sort of went back and I dived in, and this was the album that now hooked me in as a mature adult. It's the one that I'm like,
wait a minute, when did that happen?
Yeah, no, I'm joking.
A bit of trivia for this one, right? Lombardo felt the fire was beginning to dim.
Yeah,
on this record.
They don't seem to like this record that much.
Yeah, Araya thinks he phoned it in because he was married and happy.
Yeah, it's so weird.
I have some good quotes. I don't have a lot to contribute in this album, but I do have quotes. So
Kerry hates it.
Yeah, I was going to Kerry King had just gotten married and moved to Phoenix around that time, around the time of the recording, so he wasn't really as involved in the process, and a lot of people say that's part of why he doesn't like it. It's certainly not as much as he had been for the previous albums, and he told Decibel magazine in an interview that he felt his own performance was lackluster, and admitted he didn't like it as much because of Tom Araya's new vocal style. It's his least favourite album from the entire discography, which is ironic.
Yeah. But I mean, for me that's fine to disagree with Ken.
Right, it's pretty much a Hanneman record,
Yeah, and I kind of feel like he's probably just been a bit bitter about that. But I mean, I guess we've talked about Dave, but this record for me is my key Dave performance. It's probably one of my top 5 metal drum performances, along with, I was going to say,
Slipknot 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah. No, Mastodon, Remission, Converge, Jane Doe, Chris Penny, Dillinger, Escape Plan, I would say, obviously Meshuggah, but then also I was thinking Dave and Phantomas. Also is another of my favourites. But right, so we'll go through it. South of Heaven, title track, straight off, slower.
It's Raining Blood, but slower.
Exactly. It's that unmistakable Slayer riff. Like, you just hear that Slayer riff throughout, and you're like, yeah, that's the Slayer riff. And they change it about a bit, but it's the Slayer riff.
They call this an experimental record.
But it's not, I wouldn't say it's experimental, but I'd certainly say it's slightly more considered. It's a more considered heaviness, and it allows you to fucking take in those riffs and appreciate them a little bit more.
I think they also wanted to sound a bit more evil, because see the riffs sinister. Being slower, it was a little bit more sinister. Yeah,
because I think Jeff is on record as saying that they knew they were never going to top Raining Blood, so they thought, we'll try something a bit different instead.
Totally,
which I think is fair,
and it's still very much Slayer, but it's, and I fucking love this song. I love the wee guitar ringing out. I love, it's tight as fuck still.
Top 5 for me. I think
total banger.
Almost a ballad for them.
Yeah.
Can I highlight something as well, though? Because throughout the podcast we've highlighted that Kerry King said Slayer sound like Slayer, we don't want to sound anything like Slayer, we're not interested in developing. But Kerry King, like anybody, is prone to contradicting himself, right? So there's an interesting article in Kerrang about this, right? And they say what defines South of Heaven first and foremost is its purpose. The fact that the record is slower and creepier than Raining Blood wasn't organic or a coincidence, but rather an intentional move away from writing the same album twice. Kerry says, the only time we made a collective decision to do something different was South of Heaven. He told Guitar World in 2008. We had done Raining Blood and we said, let's give them something they won't expect. As such, South of Heaven sounds less like a shooting spree and more like a killer stalking their victim, driven by a sinister urge to a very specific goal. For all of Kerry's talking about, we just want to sound like Slayer. They clearly tried something different on this. It's weird, though, that maybe he's tried to kind of write that out of history by saying, it's his least favourite album. I shouldn't have said that. We shouldn't have done that. Let's just sound like fucking Slayer.
Silent Scream. I love that intro so much. That's peak Slayer riff.
Yep.
Dave's double kick throughout is unreal. And I love Tom's performance on this as well. They're all going absolutely fucking mental, and then he's just this matter of fact, just talking about horrible things. He's like, Holocaust, massive death, blah blah blah.
Electric, circus wild, deep in the infant's mind. Silent scream, bury the unwanted child. Beat the dawn, sacrifice the unborn.
And yeah, there's something really funny about the way Tom delivers stuff. But yeah,
For me, this is when I listened to this for the first time in a long time when I was doing the research for this. I started to realise that the reason Slayer songs are so short is not just because of the speed, but because actually it's just because of the speed, because this is the exact same kind of song on Rain and Blood, but drop tempo, and it's almost a minute longer.
Yeah, exactly.
Good song though.
Is this this is the first album where they had undistorted guitars,
Clean,
isn't it?
yeah.
Clean guitars.
Yeah, but they definitely don't do a ballad. Like, it's just a prelude to more carnage. Live and Dead. Another fucking lord of a riff. Once again, it doesn't go overboard mental, but breaks it down in this sort of halftime scroll for near enough most of the song, and then it just goes thrash for the last minute.
Yeah, with the solos and stuff. It's got
There's proper shredding on this.
ridiculous Araya scream, of course.
Yeah.
Patented.
Behind the Crooked Cross.
Right, can I just take issue with this, right? Because this is an example of a fucking bad faith argument where a band decides to write, they're an edgy band, they decide to write a song that sort of refers to Nazis, refers to the Third Reich, the Crooked Cross being the swastika, right? And somehow because they've referred to it, there's this bad faith assumption or convenient assumption for people that want to shit in them that expresses support. This is again something that dogged this fucking band. Like, if you talk about Nazism, it isn't the same as being I talk about Nazism every fucking week in this podcast.
Well, like I think Jeff said at one point, I think he was talking about Angel of Death, because that's obviously about Joseph Mengele.
Yeah,
they state things very matter of fact because they want to sound evil, but they don't say that it's evil because everybody fucking knows it's evil.
Exactly.
Like, if you have to say it, then, come on.
And because it's evil is why a fucking thrash metal band wants to do it.
You don't put a comment and go, oh, by the way, we don't condone this. We think this is bad. It's like, obviously it's bad.
I almost felt bad though, because it's because of tracks like Behind the Crooked Cross that in their latter years they were forced to do tunes like, was it Pride and Prejudice, that single, and this series of singles where the videos were like a guy hunting down Nazis and killing them as if to fucking spell it out, like, guys, seriously, we don't like them.
Nazis aren't good, guys.
But I mean, this is the chug that I want from Slayer. Proper headbang. Fucking love Tom's melody in here as well. Well, melody.
Come on.
Yeah, great song.
Even though Jeff Hanneman wrote it, he hates it.
I know, he said he fucking hated it. I think it's great.
And King always wanted to play it live, and Hanneman's like, nah.
Then we've got classic Slayer title, Mandatory Suicide.
This is actually the vocal in this is genuinely unsettling.
Oh, totally.
It's really cool.
It's another big chunky fucker.
It's an anti-war song, isn't it?
Yeah. Big chunky rising riff at the end. It's like the sound of impending shred doom.
It's got some weird guitar sort of tremolo-y stuff on the left channel, which gives a really creepy vibe.
Quite industrial. And then, Ghosts of War, for me, is my favourite Slayer song of all time.
Kerry King fucking hates this song.
I know,
Wow.
which is really interesting.
You and Kerry seem to butt heads on a few issues.
Totally.
You're a big Trump man.
Like, for me, for me, like, that intro, sort of quieter intro, just teasing you, and then it
Less
properly
heavy.
comes in. Yeah, less heavy. Then it comes in and it's like fucking real thrash, like the weed drum stops and grabs and stuff, and the fills, the chokes,
Dave,
yeah,
Chokes.
the chokes, and then Tom just going. Tom's vocals are a fucking class. The solos come in, and then at 1:51 you've got the halftime riff.
That's heavy as balls.
So fucking heavy, big proper Slayer, and then it just gets better.
How heavy are your balls?
Not as heavy as that.
Changing tempo but staying on that fucking beat. Punky riff then comes in, then you've got like the halftime ending. It's fucking this is like Slayer peak jug. The last 45 seconds for me is just what I want metal to sound like. It's just proper headbang, and then just Tom in the last 10 seconds, I deal in pain. I mean, it's so fucking stupid and primal, but to me it just makes me so happy.
Listeners,
I fucking love it.
feel free to clip that and use it as a message tone for one of your friends.
And then I guess, yeah, read between the lines, back with a classic Slayer riff. Builds and builds, solid as fuck Slayer.
If it was faster, I think it'd be a better song.
I think, yeah, it kind of suffers to me from coming with Ghost of War, and it could be a bit faster. But then Cleanse the Soul is very fast.
Only song that Slayer never played live.
Really interesting. It's quite bouncy. It's punky. Kerry fucking hates it.
Thinks it's one of the worst songs ever written.
Then you've got the slightly odd one, Dissident Aggressor, the Judas Priest cover. Like, they just decided to put a cover on here because they fucking loved Judas Priest, and they thought this was a song that not that many people had heard. It was like a sort of unknown one.
Prior to Undisputed Attitude, it was their only cover, studio cover. Yeah.
But it's interesting. I think it really shows what Slayer do, because if you go and listen to the Judas Priest version, it's pretty tight and cheesy and metal and leather metal.
Mm-hmm.
But then when Slayer do it actually, if you didn't know it was a cover, you'd be like,
it's a Slayer song.
It's a Slayer song.
Yeah.
And it sounds fucking evil and chaotic and messy.
It's got the guitar, so it's even got the shred.
Yeah,
which is not
exactly.
the original.
And I think it really works. And then fucking clean guitar, guys.
Clean guitar.
But don't you worry on Spill the Blood. It is not a ballad. It's a big fucking slow burner, half tempo. And man, that left channel wee riff flourish that comes in, it's such a big evil bastard of a song.
It's kind of virgin or melodic in places. It never quite
but they never quite push it. I just find that wee riff, it's quite cheeky. Yeah. What is it? It's less than 40 minutes long.
Yeah.
It's about
See, we've not actually mentioned the album runtime, but that was one of the secrets to Rain and Blood.
Totally.
34 minutes long or something like that.
And I think this is
29.
No, it's just over half an hour.
I thought it was 29 minutes long.
Maybe I'm wrong. Let me check. Yeah, you're right. Sorry, 28 minutes.
I love it when somebody that doesn't listen to Slayer gets right. I just love being right.
But then, yeah,
Guilty
South
being right.
South of Heaven is 30. South of Heaven is 37 minutes, and you know,
Fucking hell, guys.
come on, I've
Double
got stuff
album.
to do. So yeah, for me, yeah, I mean, Kerry King doesn't really like this album. He doesn't like quite a lot of my favourite Slayer songs. It turns out I'm a bit of a Jeff man.
Yeah.
But to me, this has the most memorable riffs, apart from obviously.
So you're a Hanneman man.
I'm a Hanneman man. I think it's got the best atmosphere. I love Slayer trying to be slightly groovier, but it's still a total thrash record. I chose this record, well, first of all, because it's my absolute fucking favourite. I think you have to choose 80s Slayer because although I think God Hates Us All,
Yeah, I was going to say
interesting
like asterisk.
one.
Yeah.
I still think you've got to choose 80s Slayer. You don't think you can choose Rain and Blood because it's obviously a classic.
It's ubiquitous, isn't it?
I think you could maybe choose one of the first two, but I just don't think they've become Slayer yet.
I mean, honestly, man, as a newcomer, I just think it's either this on sheer merit because it's such a good album, and yet it's always third out of those three.
Yeah, totally.
Or you go fucking full balls and you say God Hates Us All because it's like totally underrepresented in their canon, and it's actually a pretty good record. I just really like this record.
I
mean, I think it's a fair shout. I think it's, as I say, we're really just talking here, not about. I mean, Slayer are a well-known band, fucking whatever.
But they did, fucking Metallica sold 200 million records. Slayer have sold about 5 million.
Yeah, so this is more just a case of within their top three. This is always third. Always third.
Yeah, it never gets that top two.
Is it third? That's the thing. Is this better than Seasons in the Abyss? There's a good argument to be made there. So no, I mean, I think it's an interesting debate, if only to provoke that kind of disagreement. I do think there are other things that would have been an edgier call, but you're not a massively edgy guy these days.
Quite smooth.
Yeah. I mean, I would have either picked this or God Hates Us All, just like Chris said. So this gets it from me. I actually think it's better than Seasons in the Abyss as well, personally. Even though it's got War Ensemble, which is one of my favourite Slayer songs. But yeah, of course this goes in. Of course.
I am pretty dispassionate on it, so I'm gonna sit in the fence. But it's 2 votes to a neutral. That's fine.
Fucking Slayer, man.
Slayer fucking rules.
Slayer rules. Well, thanks for allowing me to enjoy Slayer so much.
It was a joy. It's a total joy.
Oh wait, start 2022.
Oh yeah, what's next? It's the fucking Nexus. Nexus time.
A complicated series of connections between different things.
So if you haven't listened before, what is the Nexus, guys?
If you haven't listened before, someone else will describe it.
The Nexus is where we try and link
the artists
either as quickly or as interestingly a way as possible to a person or a concept that somebody else has chosen.
It's the interaction quotient. So basically you give us a name of a famous person, character, whatever, and by the way, we would love some more because we need to restock the little tub. And we try and do the sort of 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon to get them there via hopefully some quite unusual bits of trivia and such like. The Nexus this week is a guy called Derek Griffiths. Now, we've got a lot of listeners outside the UK. Derek Griffiths is a British TV actor mostly. He's done some stage and stuff like that, but he was in a lot of children's programmes and stuff like Corrie and Casualty and a whole bunch of other kind of tropes of British TV drama. And that was chosen for us by Nick Thompson. Thank you, Nick Thompson.
Thanks, Nick.
So, as we mentioned earlier, Jeff Hanneman was diagnosed with necrotizing fasciitis in 2011, thanks to probably a spider bite. Necrotizing fasciitis, if you click on the Wikipedia page, you will feel ill because you see lots of
it's horrible,
horrific images of flesh falling off people. But there is also a notable cases list of famous folk or interesting people that have got necrotizing fasciitis.
We didn't actually point this out earlier on, but necrotizing fasciitis, Jeff Hanneman suffered from a disease that was
definitely a Slayer song.
A Slayer song, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, totally. So, for instance, Eric Corneille, the winner of the 2001 Nobel Prize in Physics, lost his left arm and shoulder to this disease.
How do you lose a shoulder?
Yeah, I know.
I mean, that's different from losing an arm, isn't it?
Yeah.
2004, Don Rickles had it, but he fully recovered. Don Rickles, the comedian actor, beat Mr. Potato Head in Toy Story. Lucien Bouchard, former Premier of Quebec, lost a leg. Yeah, there's some fucking grim stories here. And in 2006, the British writer and satirist Alan Coren actually, I think it was an insect in France that bit him. And
it was in France and not in Britain.
Send them back.
See, the funny thing is, I'm not in favour of Brexit, but I am in favour of sending back all the bugs with necrotising fasciitis.
So yeah, Alan Coren, just one of those classic Radio 4 personalities, and a father of Victoria Coren Mitchell, and a cunt. So in 1978, Alan Coren wrote The Losers, which was an unsuccessful sitcom, that's what it says, about a wrestling promoter, and that starred Alfred Molina.
What?
And Leonard Rossiter.
I'm sort of into that.
Yeah, I would watch that.
So yeah, that's really, what the fuck's going on there? Leonard Rossiter, most 70s actor.
The Rise and Fall of
Reginald Perrin, and he was also in Rising Damp, which was the most depressing comedy of all time. And in 1980, they made a movie of Rising Damp. Like, they made a movie of all those sitcoms, like Porridge, Dad's Army, On the Buses.
Yeah.
And Derek Griffiths also starred in the 1980 movie Rising Damp.
That was efficient.
Fast and
meaningless to anyone outside the UK.
Just like Slayer.
Will I go next?
I don't mind. Yeah, go for it.
Cool. So Dave Lombardo was the drummer of Slayer for a while. He's actually for a while. He's actually worked.
He would object to that.
He would object to that. He was the only drummer of Slayer.
Paul Bostap's into it, but no.
The other guy.
Dave Lombardo has worked on a number of films over the years, basically playing drums for loads of composers like Tyler Bates and all that. In 2014, he played drums on the soundtrack to the film The Monkey King, which is a Chinese/Hong Kong fantasy film based on a book from the 16th century. In the film are Donnie Yen and Chow Yun-fat. Chow Yun-fat starred in 95 films.
Wow.
Christ.
Including a couple of Western films, including Bulletproof Monk.
Classic.
I actually have an interesting story about Bulletproof Monk, but I don't know if it's... I met a guy on set on a film once. It was just a little film, and he was a really nice Canadian guy, and he used to act, and he was put forward to be in Bulletproof Monk, and then for some reason the producers said they didn't want him, and they went for Sean William Scott instead. and then he went in a mad depression, and he said that basically I had just went on a mad bender with hookers and coke for 2 years, and then I moved to Scotland. Sorry, carry on.
One film which wasn't made in the West but was huge over here was Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which he was in.
I think that's shit, but yeah.
It was a huge success though.
It was, yeah. I mean, I was no part of that, but yeah.
And that film also stars Michelle Yeoh, who's a total badass. Rotten Tomatoes named her the greatest action heroine of all time, which is pretty cool.
Stretch.
And one of the films that she was badass, quote unquote badass in, was Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. You know, the Marvel film?
Yeah, it's just out.
Yeah, it's a decent film. The martial arts scenes are pretty great, but then it just becomes big CGI smashy fest at the end, so that's what you can expect. Anyway, it's quite difficult to find someone who's not a member of the Marvel Cinematic Universe at this point. Derek Griffiths is not a member of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah, I thought he played.
Sadly. But who is Letitia Wright, who plays Shuri in Black Panther. She's also in the first episode of Small Axe, the Steve McQueen series. She plays the main character in Mangrove, which the episode's called, which also stars Derek Griffiths.
Okay.
Pretty good. Small Axe is fucking class, by the way.
So we actually touched on a few of these earlier on, but September 11th, 2001.
Tragedy.
Yep. God Hates Us All was released on September the 11th.
It certainly was.
Was it? I didn't actually know that.
Right.
But was it not Toxicity by System of a Down and Iowa by Slipknot were also released on that day?
So,
well, actually,
anyone else? Anyone know what else happened on September 11th, 2001?
Well, I was supposed to be going to see fucking Pantera and Slayer, but never happened.
Well, I know what you're thinking, though, and then you're right. The American sitcom writer David Angel passed away.
Oh.
However, David Angell unfortunately passed away alongside his wife Lynn aboard American Airlines Flight 11, the first plane to strike the Twin Towers. So he was somewhat involved. By coincidence, though, in a 1997 episode of Frasier,
Right.
co-written by Angell, a female character, who I believe is called Laura, leaves a message for Frasier saying that she will soon arrive on American Airlines Flight 11.
Gosh,
Wow.
that is a coincidence.
Isn't it? So,
Just arrive, not like a crash.
very quickly into the building, no. In that show, Frasier, the callers to the Frasier Crane's KACL radio show were all voiced by celebrities
Yeah, I heard that.
and added during post-production, meaning, you know, crew members would do it on set, but then they would get folks to overdub. That included Gillian Anderson,
Right.
Ron Howard, Halle Berry,
Berry.
Mel Brooks,
Yeah.
Lily Tomlin, Eddie Van Halen,
Really?
Nice.
Fuck.
and
There you go.
Carrie Fisher.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Carrie Fisher was Princess Leia.
Oh yes, I've heard of that.
General Leia.
In 2017, the Coronation Street characters Mary and Norris dressed up as Ben Kenobi and Princess Leia to pass as a couple in a competition. And then when the Norris finally died in that show, Mary wore that same Princess Leia costume to his funeral as a callback. It's really popular for fans of that show, actually.
For fans of Star Wars, they all started watching Coronation Street.
Norris, the character, had previously tried to help another character in the show, Freddie, learn how to dance, only to trip him up and break Freddie's bloody wrist.
Norris.
Freddie was played by Derek Griffiths.
Ding ding.
There we go.
Great work.
Magic.
You didn't get Nazis in there. Oh wait, started with Slayer.
I got jihadis in.
Yeah, that's
sorta. So that's the Nexus, that's the show, that's Slayer, that's 2022 off to a flying start.
Yep. Can only get slower now.
And it is going to get slower. Dave, you're not with us next week. We have another guest commentator coming in the form of
Babs from Over Underrated Music Podcast. She's been on before.
Yep, for folks that were paying attention at the end of last year, Babs gave away that she liked a band that yours truly has been spoiling for ages to get involved. And that band is the band Millionaire, an eccentric alternative pop band from Belgium, and we are going to analyse their album Outside the Simian Flock. This, by the way, is one of the albums that when we first started this show, I had a short list of stuff that I'm like, this is getting talked about, and this album is getting talked about. So I'm very much looking forward to it. I won't have to do any research. It'll all be improvised. Babs seems pretty on message. Mark's going to hate it, and I'm okay with that. But that's what's happening next week. And the nexus for that will be Millionaire are going to be next into Jack Black's Maw, courtesy of Crag.
Interested.
Thanks.
It would be good to put in the stipulation that you can't do Jack Black.
I might take that as a challenge. I've got a feeling that Jack Black's Maw is famous for something weird.
Okay, cool.
I seem to remember that. Anyway, I want to wish you bye-bye by saying...
Satan. Slayer fucking rocks, man.
Thanks, bye.